Alright everyone, it's time to rank every main weapon in the game from worst to best. We're gonna get started. This is from a pro player's perspective. This is competitive, not solo queue. Solo queue would look incredibly different with that old disclaimer thing out of the way. Play what you like, subscribe if you enjoy, let's go. The first weapon to get its own tier is the Undercover Umbrella. This thing has way too weak damage, it doesn't have any presence on the map, it is a kit that absolutely doesn't work for it. Mine is not good on a weapon like this, and Reef Slider has way too much vulnerability on a weapon that already can't kill quickly and capitalize off the slider's damage effectively. It's just overall an incredibly weak weapon that isn't good at doing anything, and even the shield, while somewhat useful, just came at the sacrifice of like every other stat in the game. Would you give a splatter shot a 200 HP shield and nerf all of its stats by like a third or a fourth? Probably not, and that's what Undercover is. Poor H3, the main weapon got worse in this game because mobility has become more important and better, which means H3 has a harder time hitting things. It has point sensor, which doesn't do much for it, and Tacticooler is for aggressive weapons and mobile weapons, and H3 is neither of these. I don't really know why they chose this special to go with the weapon. It doesn't really synergize with comps that want Tacticooler, and Tacticooler's best mode is Rainmaker, the worst mode for H3 and point sensor. The entire thing is a travesty. The weapon is just absolutely screwed until it gets another kit. Rip H3. Splattershot Pro's vanilla kit now has a 190p crab. It is still just absolutely outclassed. It doesn't really do anything well enough to cover comps like Jack of all trades weapon should. Angle Shooter is still the worst sub in the game. There are still better crab options that can do things Pro wants to do better. There's just not really a reason to run this weapon in a team comp. Aerospray doesn't really work with Reef Slider. I see what they were trying to do, especially now that Reef Slider can pop the Rainmaker shield in one hit if it has no damage on it, but as a whole, it's still a weapon that doesn't synergize well with Reef Slider. This one has even less damage to combo off of than the Undercover Umbrella does. Fizzy Bomb is okay for it. The main weapon kills very slowly for its range value, even if all the shots hit, and is just very limited. It's built to be a support, but it doesn't have a good support kit. It has a Reef Slider. Yeah, Umbrella will go here too. Even outside of the bugs where the shield barely even works, the weapon does very low damage. Its sub-weapon doesn't help it at all. It's very ink hungry. Its paint is bad. Its ink efficiency is bad. Hold up, I'm getting my quote about Umbrella. Umbrella is good. You just have to make up for the damage to objects, the ink efficiency, the speed, the kill time, the range, the paint, the sub-weapon, the special output, the downtime, fighting most special weapons, fighting area of effect weapons, fighting charger bow and splatanas, and the fact that it doesn't work 90% of the time. There's some small exaggeration there. Obviously, I'm poking fun at the weapon, but it's not exactly wrong. The actual shielding capability of the Umbrella, even when it works, just isn't really that worth it, and most of the good options in this game just have either the mobility, the damage, or even the special that absolutely deals with Umbrella way too well. And I think this weapon just is in need of major damage buffs. All the Umbrellas are, but especially this one really needs to have some strengths here. Could also benefit from being 190p. L3 is another weapon that just doesn't really have a reason to be picked for crab. It lacks a bomb. The curling isn't super useful for it because it doesn't struggle too much with mobility. It does have a bit better paint range than something like a Splash, but ultimately that's just not great a reason, and the mobility overall in this weapon still is a bit problematic compared to just how good shooter mobility is in this game. And without main power up, the damage it has is actually pretty weak as well, so that's yet another problem for this weapon. Before we get into the mid tiers, I used to be super into game design when I was younger. I created a few Mario platformers on a site called Scratch. So I'd like to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, SNHU. SNHU is one of the largest accredited non-profit online degree offerings in the entire country. I want to talk to you about their game development program. In this program, you'll learn how to create realistic dynamic gameplay experiences with game AI, game physics, and 2D and 3D graphic and interface design. You'll also learn computer programming languages like C++, C#, and Java. And you'll be able to learn 3D modeling and texturing with game art software. You can learn how to research, develop, and contribute to advances and trends within the gaming industry, and courses are taught by faculty with real-world experience. SNHU is radically affordable, and their online tuition rates are some of the lowest in the nation. Go to snhu.edu/ProChara, also linked in my description, to see what the current average annual salary is for a programmer and request free information about the program. When you request information, a real person will hop on a call and discuss how the program could benefit you personally. It only takes one click to find your calling. Thank you to SNHU for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to the list. Next up is Limited. These are weapons that do have some form of a niche, but the niche they have isn't good enough to really actually be worth using outside of incredibly limited situations. First up is Reflux and Gold Aerospray, because these two two are the same weapon. They are painters with good paint, but no painting range, a sub-weapon that applies no pressure, and a special they want to spam. They are great in turf war, but bad in ranked modes because you need to put pressure out while you're farming and trying to spam the special. And on top of that, both of these specials got weaker to spam in this update because Booyah Bomb got more vulnerability and Missiles is now worse specifically at spamming it, which is really bad because this is the main thing it's supposed to do. Both of these have main weapons that are too weak at fighting and subs that do not do any poking power, and so for the most part they do not apply enough pressure to sustain themselves in higher level environments. Blob's main job is controlling space right now, and it does have decent damage per second, but again, struggles a lot from the mobility, the sub doesn't put too much pressure, and honestly, the sub and special are both mainly paint orientated, which kind of locks Blob in. It doesn't give it a lot of versatility, so it also makes the weapon extremely comp dependent to make up for its weaknesses, and the strengths it has just aren't as worth it right now as other weapons. Clash and both Luna Blasters are things you would argue for short range tower control maps you could maybe see, but ultimately there are better niches in that mode. Clash's kill time is too weak, Luna Neo's special doesn't synergize with it as well, and for the normal Luna Blaster there are just better zipcaster options even on this mode. All of these weapons have a decent bit of paint and special output problems even with 180p, to where I think they're not really worth picking too much right now. Sploosh is a Rainmaker weapon, but Curling Bomb isn't that good on Rainmaker. Sploosh 7 was really nice because of the Splat Bomb, and this weapon ultimately can't really do as well on Rainmaker as it did in the second game. I do think with an alternate kit it could be a lot higher. Sploosh is still very mobile and does very good damage, but there's just other options that do better damage, especially since Splatana Wiper was added, which also has good Rainmaker shield damage, has a better bomb, and still has stamp. If it wasn't for the insane mobility of the main weapon, it would honestly be down here just because Wiper exists, but at least it's way faster. Vanilla Jet and 96 are both kind of supportive long to mid-range weapons with a vacuum. Both their subs are way too weak for the weapon right now, and the weapon struggle to kill because of how fast-paced the game is, and vacuum isn't as valuable a special right now because it's very situational. And if you're gonna have a situational special, there are just better options for the main weapon to use. Dynamo Roller also kind of suffers from the H3 problem where the main mode you'd want a Tacticooler in is Rainmaker, the worst mode for Dynamo. Sprinkler is at least a bit better on this weapon because it can help it move by painting its feet, and the overall paint output is more valuable on this weapon because of how it plays. But ultimately, the main weapon is really weak, doesn't paint that well, has a lot of downtime, and its kit isn't the greatest right now balance-wise, even if it can work with the weapon, and the main mode where you would want the special just doesn't work for it either. Mini Splowling's a pretty good main weapon with a good sub, but I think the special doesn't really work super well with Mini, and Stamp is also just a bit too vulnerable. You're not really going to be running up close to someone with a Mini. You're going to be taking advantage of the fact that you have more range than short-range shooters and kind of spacing them out with your mobility. The Stamp and the main weapon kind of clash a little bit, and unless if the special gets a lot stronger, it doesn't really work for the weapon right now. The only reason I'm putting Dapple Doolies outside the Outclassed tier is because the damage per second to the Rainmaker shield is actually useful, and with the slider buffs, it is better as a special in Rainmaker. That being said, I think it's still not great, and Torpedo's worst mode is Rainmaker, so it still doesn't have full kit synergy. If it had a more lethal bomb, I could maybe see it being higher, but in this case, not really. I think Tenebrella actually has a very synergistic kit. I like Beacon with it to make it a support, and I think Vacuum in conjunction with the Tent Shield can actually make you very difficult to kill. It can cover your blind spot or prevent things from Splatanas from getting close enough to kill you in the vacuum. The main issue is that a lot of the good specials right now can just absolutely destroy the Tent Shield. Stuff like Crab and Booyah Bomb are good examples of that, and there are also more new weapons like Splatanas that absolutely shred the Tent Shield. The damage it outputs isn't great, and the shield is unusually inconsistent and has a lot of shield launch bugs, which those combined just make the weapon way too inconsistent to be worth it. I could maybe see it being up here for a Clam Blitz niche, maybe, but I just don't think this is the right meta for it right now. If Forge Pro was not 210 here, it could be here and actually have a niche for a shooter that can get a reliable amount of Booyah Bombs, but it doesn't, so it is just a pro with a better kit, but it's still a pro. All the problems I mentioned in my Splattershot Pro video are still present, and it actually struggles with special output even more than the Vanilla Pro because, again, 210. Why is it 210? I do not understand. I think the pencil as a main weapon is actually a lot better than people give it credit for. The ability to hold multiple shots and just kind of strafe around and threaten people with them is kind of useful. The weapon's still a bit awkward, but I think that's mostly for it being new. The actual reason it's down here is honestly the kit. Sprinkler doesn't do too much for it, and Tacticooler, again, best for Rainmaker, is on a weapon with pitifully bad object damage, which, by the way, I don't know why this thing has bad object damage, but it is the main thing also holding the main weapon back, because with Object Shredder, it is a 10-shot versus Crab. Why? Why is it so bad at breaking objects? Between that and the kit, it is held back by the dumbest things. With a better kit and object damage, it could be way, way higher. So much potential in this weapon. Carbon is your Zipcaster weapon that can reliably and quickly one-shot people. But outside of that, it's going to take a while to get a Zipcaster. The sub isn't great for it, and Carbon Deco exists with basically the perfect kit for this weapon. So you guys might have noticed that there is a separate Big Swig tier. Well, that's because Big Swig is the weirdest weapon they put in this game, to where, like, it can paint something so effectively that on some zones map, it can basically solo hold it and change how the enemy team plays. I don't know if it'd actually be super effective at this. It's still too early to say, but it basically has massive potential for zone cheese. Reflux can too? No, Reflux does not have the painting range this thing has. This weapon has good paint, good painting range, good burst paint. It is the best paint in the game, and it's fairly ink efficient as well. And then it can use vacuum to stall out zones or other specials as an ink tank refill to then continue painting and stalling. We will see some Japanese team try to cheese zones, because Japan loves to try to cheese zones. In the West, nobody's gonna play this thing, but people will in Japan. So that being said, it's at a weird part of being the best at its job for cheesing zones, but that's kind of a niche it's more dominant in. But at the same time, it's so outclassed and weak that it's absolutely terrible everything else. So I just gave up and I gave it a Big Swig tier because it looks funny. You could argue, I guess, it would go here. You could argue it'd go here. You could argue it'd go here. It's dumb. The weapon is absolutely pathetic in every other mode. It is only good at cheesing zones. It is only good because of the paint output. It is so weird. Big Swig in its own tier. Big Swig moment. Yeah, woo! So I'll be going through this next tier very quickly. These are weapons that have a niche that isn't super needed, but they're good at doing their job. Mid-range poke damage with displacement that's a bit too vulnerable and takes a bit too long to get its special. Mid-range poke that doesn't really have a good sub-weapon at all and a very situational special, but can be more useful for protecting itself or the objective on modes like tower control and splat zones. Weapon that's very good against short range, but suffers from not having a sub-weapon and a special weapon that's very limited. Your long-range inkjet niche. Really good against weapons that require location, can move very fast, keep frequent paint, and gets whales for entry tools, but is limited at fighting things and is not self-sufficient. Rainmaker weapon to play incredibly fast with beacons and Tacticooler. Weapon that is best at staying alive in its own space, but is incredibly immobile, has a low special output, and is very comp dependent. Rainmaker niche for more versatile comps that want Tacticooler. Weapon that's best for holding down an area and being very stationary in the backline category, especially helped by the fact that it has Booyah Bomb, but struggles against heavy displacement options. Weapon that will absolutely annoy the crap out of your team if it gets behind you a single time, but struggles to get behind the enemy team and needs a team that can really capitalize off the fact that there's an ink brush back there with ultra stamps constantly coming out. Missile spam that has a bomb, but also can't really fight very well. The full charge is terrible, the mobility isn't great, and overall flings is just kind of better. Okay, so last up are two weapons that are a little bit different. First up, we have Roller, which is very good under ledges. It has a special that's very versatile for its team, being both supportive and aggressive, and it's the one weapon that Curling Bomb is actually nice on because it desperately needs the mobility. That being said, it's entirely dependent on its team to get in. It can really struggle at dealing with specific matchups, and the main problem that it's down here and only in Nishin is because most of the maps just absolutely have way too limited approach options for something with as linear as approach as a Curling Bomb. So for better maps, especially if we get more of them, we will see a bit of Roller, but on the weaker maps, it's way too easy and linear to predict where Roller is going to go and what it's going to do. And finally is Range Blaster. The reason Range Blaster is niche is because having one on your team basically nerfs your comp. You have insanely low special output, insanely low paint, insanely high downtime just to get AoE, a decent bomb, and a wave breaker that you'll very rarely get. It's only really worth it in tower control and against very specific comps. It has no way of dealing with Ninja Squid, its comp has to make up for it a lot, and ultimately, it's way too gear dependent because you can't run both Intensify and Quick Respawn. If you don't run intensify, stuff like Wave Breaker or highly mobile comp screws you over, and if you don't run quick respawn, you can be punished and out of the fight too long when you already have too much downtime. It's just too many flaws on one weapon to be worth it outside of the one mode it's very good on because of its ability to affect the objective. Trust me, I want to rank it higher. This is my favorite weapon, but like, you guys haven't seen me playing it for a reason. So, Dominant Niche. This will be very similar to Good Niche and will not take long to go through a good bit of the weapons. The difference is these are the best at what they're trying to do instead of just good at it, which means they are much more common. Octobrush is the Zipcaster niche. It does a great job at being able to jump and flick, which is very powerful. It moves fast, it can get the special often, it has a bomb to poke. This is the weapon if you want a Zipcaster specifically just for general uses. If you want Zipcaster as a way to deal with crab or more long-range threats, Bucket Deco's a bit better at it. It doesn't have a bomb, but it's 180p, so it's a bit cheaper, and the main weapon is very good at fighting things like short-range shooters. So it gives it a lot of matchups it's favorable with, and with faster comps I think is very good because it's great at creating openings and being very aggressive between the main and special weapon. Bucket is really similar to Bucket Deco. Instead, in this case, you're using tri-strikes to break the objects instead. Bucket has a bit more vulnerability, but a bit more versatility with the bomb, so I think it has its own uses compared to Bucket Deco, and I wouldn't really rank one above the other. T-Tech and Squeezer are your Zuka weapons, just in different categories. If you want a more mid-range weapon, you'll pick the Squeezer. It's a bit limited because of its wall, which means it's a bit harder as a backline because it doesn't really have as much range to be a real backline. It's like a mid-range weapon that would be the longest range weapon on your comp, and Splatter Shot is your short-range weapon with Zuka. It does have to back off a little bit more to use the Zuka, but that's not that bad for the weapon. The main reason these are here are because Zuka just isn't as good right now as some of the other specials. But in terms of if you actually want a Zuka, these are your two big picks. Splash Shot Jr. is still your bubble weapon of choice. If you want a bubble, this is what you would pick. If you want a bubble weapon and also need something that can fight, you would pick the Zimmy. Both of these are kind of limited by crab meta though, and the fact that Splash is really good is pushing both of these down. I think if crab were out of the meta, Junior would be slightly better than Zimmy, but right now both of these suffer from similar problems, and I think Zimmy can actually fit into more crab comps because of its ability to fight things compared to Junior. Squelcher is your mid-range wave breaker weapon. Its two problems are that its kill time is fairly slow and unreliable due to the spread, and the weapon has bad ink efficiency, meaning it has a lot of downtime, but in some matchups it's worth it because of its ability to bully short-range weapons and for the wave breaker output being very useful, such as when fighting Tetra Dooley. This is your actual blaster you will want to run in tower control. It has a better special, it has a cheaper cost, and it is the fastest of all the one-shot blasters due to the low end lag it has, which makes it particularly good in tower control and totally functional in other modes. V-Charger is the weapon you actually pick for vacuum. With 200p, it's not too expensive. It is a great main weapon, able to put out pressure, and chargers are still solid right now, even if they struggle a bit against crab. If you want a vacuum, this is the weapon you're gonna pick. Before this patch, I thought Bow had a lot of things it tried to do, but didn't do any of them well, and now I think it does stuff well enough. This is a backline that is meant to have good object shredding. It actually can two-shot crab. Its pain ability is decent, which means it's going to be able to get whales and use whales to let its team in. All of those were some of the main problems with the weapon, and they got better. It's still not really great at anything it does, so it struggles with versatility enough to be much higher, but if you build a comp around the bow in this patch, I think it is actually worth it and can be useful against crab. Still a bit held back by Toxic Mist and the lack of versatility though. Bamboo is your midline object shredder. It is very mobile for its range value. It does good damage to crab. Whale is very useful against crab. And I think in general, if there's any weapon that might be a bit higher and might sort of try to replace Flingza, this is the best candidate for it. It doesn't have as good a special or a sub weapon, but I do think it's up there. And Autobomb is still useful to be able to scout people in addition to the whale, so I think the kit still has decent synergy. And as a whole, it's a weapon with a lot of potential. It still does struggle to kill at times. It can struggle when it's locked out. It still does have a lot of downtime, but it has a lot of reasons to be used where I think it can be worth it. Squirfer is kind of hard to say. It is still a cheap and fast bubble. The point sensor is okay in this meta versus Ninja Squid comps, which gives it a tool to actually deal with that ability that otherwise would be a hard counter to it. I'm just still not sure how worth it Squiffer is. The range and the jumping charge is still very useful, and the weapon still has a lot of things it can do, but I haven't really seen its ability to keep up with top tier threats to the point where I don't feel comfortable ranking it any higher. Top tier is going to have to be its own video because these weapons require the most explanation, and this video has gone on long enough, but this is where the rankings stand right now, and I will see you all next time.